The movie's not about those political moments, and it's not about the political violence. It's about the consequences of that violence.
Welcome to the Outtake Show, the film podcast where we discuss all things within the movie and TV world. I'm your host, Junior, and you'll be watching our interview with writer, actor, and director Cherien Dabis to discuss her latest film, All That's Left of You, a drama that follows a Palestinian teenager that gets swept up at a protest. His mother reflects on their family's story of survival and hope across 3 generations that led them to this very moment. Enjoy.
I watched the movie and I was kind of honestly blown away. Like, this was a very unique way of telling a story like this. Like, 3 generations, 76 years
Yeah.
of storytelling. So I guess my first question is just asking, like, what led you to tell this story in this way?
I was really interested in showing how history shapes people over time,
Yeah.
and that was partly inspired by watching the generations of my own family and how much our identities were formed by what was happening in Palestine.
Yeah.
And how the different generations, reacted very differently to events and what was happening and what had happened and what should happen. And so I wanted to really show how these political events impact people, how they infiltrate the domestic sphere, how they change relationships between fathers and sons and husbands and wives, and really kind of show like the ongoing impact of this violence on people and how it can change the rest of their lives. It's
Yeah.
not just a um, it's sort of you survive an incident of violence and you get on with your life. Like, these are life-changing events
Yeah.
that are happening. And really, the movie is about the ongoing Nakba, right? The Nakba, never really ended. And so for me to tell a story about the Nakba had to be intergenerational because it's really about the ongoing impact of it. It's still happening.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned the relationship between father and son. Like, there's one particular scene in this film that, honestly, I was very nervous watching that scene, because it was a scene dealing with father and son dealing with soldiers pointing guns at them, at himself and his son. I've seen that you mentioned that you've taken like some personal stories that's happened to you in the past and put it into the story. Of course, you've written, directed it, and starred in it. So I can imagine this is quite a personal story for yourself to tell. How was it adding these type of stories that kind of come from your kind of inspired from your past, adding into this film to tell to all to see?
I think it was really important for me to add those things because, while the film is based on historical events, it is a fictional family at the center of it.
Yeah.
But those family members, some of them are inspired by my family members. And um, some of the events in the film were inspired by, my own experience. So they're not exactly what I went through, but I needed to share what I did go through. Like, the scene that you're talking about, for example, was inspired by one of my first trips visiting Palestine when I was 8 years old. And we were held at the border between Jordan and the West Bank for 12 hours. So we were held by Israeli soldiers. They interrogated my parents. They picked through the contents of our suitcases, and then they ordered us all to be strip searched, including my baby sisters, who were 3 and 1. So, my dad was so upset, and he confronted the soldiers, and they started yelling at him, and he started yelling at them. And this was a moment for me where I like really started to understand what it meant to be Palestinian, and also where I saw my father helpless and kind of powerless for the first time.
Yeah.
The only difference is that for me, I didn't live there. So I wasn't under occupation all the time. The soldiers weren't there all the time. When we went back to the States, which is where I grew up as a Palestinian, American in the diaspora, because my father was forced into exile in 1967. So it took him many years to get foreign citizenship just so he could return to visit
Yeah.
his family and his homeland, right? And this incident where we were held for 12 hours happened on one of these visits. So, the difference for me was that when we returned to the US, my father could protect me.
Yeah.
But I kept thinking about the people who live there.
Of course.
Well, what happens when you're a kid and you find out your parents can't protect you?
Mhm.
What happens when you're a parent and you realize you have no power to protect your children? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that arose out of my own experience and that inspired these scenes and these questions in the film.
Yeah, it's definitely a question I thought. I haven't got no kids yet, but I've definitely thought about what would I do as a father to protect my child, but also how that experience will affect the child. And we see later on in the film how that carries on through generational trauma. I would say.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very interesting seeing that you have done some films in the past. Um, was there a particular reason why you decided, okay, this is the next film that I'm gonna put out there?
I really always was thinking about this film in some ways, like since I was a kid, I wanted to tell a Nekba story. This was, the Nekba is still quite taboo in a lot of places.
Yeah,
And I never really understood why as a kid. I didn't know why more people didn't know what happened to Palestinians in 1948.
yeah,
And I didn't know why people, like why we were made to feel like we couldn't talk about it or that it was offensive in certain places to talk about it. And so I really always wanted to, tell that story. And I knew when I became a filmmaker, I knew I had to wait until I was emotionally ready, until I was really artistically ready to tell that story because it's a big story. It was a lot to take on. It's a big responsibility. It's a massive film that covers many years of history with a giant cast and a lot of kids. And, so I knew that it wasn't going to be my first or my second film.
yeah.
But after I made my first two films, I started to feel like I was ready. And that was when I decided to start exploring the idea.
Nice, and it's done really well. It's very beautiful.
Thank
Like
you.
I love how the fact that like, of course it's drama, it deals with a lot of grief as well, but at some point in the film there is like an element of like comedy in it as well with the grandfather. And I was just quite interested in like how did you find a way to talk about grief but also make sure there's a little bit of comedy aspect as well?
Yeah, it was really important to me. It's always important to me to use humor, like to really infuse my work with humor, even when it's heavy or full of grief, because that's life.
Yeah, of course.
And sometimes in these situations, what helps us to survive is just having a sense of humor. That's how we get through these impossible situations. And that certainly is how Palestinians get through living under occupation. I mean, every time I go to Palestine, I'm so inspired by people's resilience, their humanity, and their sense of humor.
Yeah.
The fact that they can laugh at what's happening
Mm.
and that they can laugh at their own anger over what's happening or their own reactions. Um, and so I really wanted to include that. I think it's such an important part of our survival instinct as humans. That we use humor
Yeah.
to get us through these tough times.
Yeah. And I think it also humanizes as well. It makes you realize this is overall a family, like a real family,
Absolutely.
that there's love, there's laughter, and of course there's fiction as well that's going on.
But the film does center on the family, and
Yeah.
everything that happens politically is really background. I mean, the movie's not about those political moments, and it's not about the political violence. It's about the consequences of that violence on people, on this family over time. How these moments of violence in the film change the relationships, between the members of this family.
Yeah, definitely beautiful. And I think it's definitely touching on a topic that I think a lot of people, especially in my generation of like entering the 30s, of like doing a lot of looking back.
Yeah.
I think might be misquoting you, but I think you mentioned how you can't really tell what's happening in the present without looking back. And I think this film does a beautiful job at doing that. Just touching on the making of this film, how did it go about getting this filmed, made and distributed?
Well, I went about getting it financed largely independently. I mean, I did partner with European co-producers, and we did find a fair amount of financing in Europe through European public funds and German public funds. And so we also shot in places where we could take advantage of tax credits. So initially, we had always planned to shoot 90% of the film in Palestine and 10% in Cyprus. So it was an official European co-production between Germany and Cyprus, where we were going to be shooting most of the film in Palestine. And we found our financing, like I said, in Europe, in the Middle East, a lot of Arab funds and grants, and then private equity from people everywhere, and donations and things like that. So it came together really, really independently. And um, We prepped the entire film in Palestine. We worked for 5 months on the ground. You know, we did everything that you do when you're prepping a movie. And I had foreign crew arrive. And we were 2 weeks away from shooting when the events of October 2023 basically, you know, stopped us in our tracks and made us, you know, kind of rethink what to do. You know, we were suddenly thrust into total uncertainty. We didn't know if we'd be able to keep going, and if so, where, and whether we'd stay in Palestine or have to leave. All we knew was that we were in Ramallah at the time. Things got very tense, and my foreign crew, you know, within really 24 to 48 hours, wanted to leave. They were scared, and their families were worried. So we evacuated people, and as much as I wanted to stay, I also evacuated. We decided to go to Cyprus to begin the shoot there, and thought, well, maybe we can return to Palestine. But as we know, things just escalated and escalated, and so we weren't able to return. And we decided it's more important now, given what's happening, for the film to keep going, for us to just make this and get it out into the world. So finally, we shot the majority of the film in Jordan, in the Palestinian refugee camps in the north of Jordan, and then also in Greece, with some remote shooting in Palestine. But it was a process of starting and stopping. It was extremely challenging. We had to, you know, our budget shot up because we had to start completely from scratch. I mean, we had to start pre-production all over again. So we had to add all of those weeks of pre-production. I had to recast a lot of the roles. I had to work with 4 different crews in 4 different countries, 2 different cinematographers, 3 different assistant directors. It was quite challenging and took much longer than it originally would have. But finally, we finished the film. We premiered it at Sundance in early, you know, 2025. And it was amazing, emotional, you know, multiple standing ovations, incredible reviews. And then mainstream distributors and streamers passed on the film. They said that they were afraid of the subject matter. So, you know, distribution became the next hurdle, was just trying to figure out how do we, you know, I mean, the good news is we sold really well internationally. We have great distributors now everywhere, but initially it was challenging. And at least for the United States and a couple of other places. So um, it, you know, the great news is we eventually did get distribution everywhere, and we have distribution in the UK. The film is coming out this Friday, February the 6th. And I'm just, it's, for me, just feels like a miracle that we were able to get it to this point after everything we went through.
Yeah. It also seems like there's like a wave of Palestinian stories being told, and especially in Western culture, being accepted a lot more in Western culture. Why do you think it is that it's now that we're not just getting these stories, but also getting, it seems, a Western audience appreciating and kind of wanting more of these stories to be told?
Well, I mean, I think it took a genocide to get there. I think it took like things accelerating in this incredibly horrific and unprecedented way. And for like a worldwide audience to literally be watching a live stream genocide and seeing the most unbelievably graphic and terrifying images and just wondering why. Why is this happening? Why are we allowing this? Why is this okay? Why are children suffering so much? You know, what is going on? And I think that is what woke a lot of people up and got them asking a lot of questions, got them very interested in Palestine. And yeah, Palestine is at the forefront of people's minds now. You know, they want to understand, and they recognize that what's happening there are echoes of it everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, what we're seeing in Minnesota in the United States, like there are echoes of this violence everywhere. And so I think people are seeing that, like really kind of seeing that if you understand what's happening there, you understand a lot about the world, and that we are all impacted by what's happening there. So sadly, it took a lot for people to kind of, you know, wake up and become interested, but we're there now. And so I think that's a great thing. That's one of the silver linings of this moment of being here, is just like, okay, we paid an incredibly horrible price and are still paying that price. But at least the world is waking up. Like, let there be some change. Let there be pressure on governments, you know? I think the difference is, there are, I think, still gatekeepers within the industry, especially in Hollywood, who don't necessarily want to support these films, perhaps out of fear, like what we were experiencing and hearing out of Sundance. But hopefully that will change as well, as people become more interested and audiences come out to see these films. And it's so important that audiences support these films, because otherwise filmmakers like myself won't be able to continue making them. It's really important that audiences go out really on opening weekend. The sooner the better, because if the films don't perform, they're out of the cinemas. That's how it is these days. You've got to perform your opening weekend, otherwise you're booted out of the cinemas. So yeah, I think going out and supporting these films is really vital to ensuring that we can keep telling our stories. And it's imperative that we keep telling these stories. I mean, Palestinians have been dehumanized in such a horrifying way that has allowed for this level of unprecedented violence. And our stories have been erased and kind of omitted from history books. So it's really vital. I think for us, it's a matter of survival for us to be telling these stories.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the importance of cinema, to allow these stories to be told and to reach the audience. Like I do believe there's a huge audience out there that appreciate the film, that will appreciate these type of stories being told.
Yeah.
So I think we're slowly getting there, where there's slowly like more people are embracing and being open to get these stories. I think people always are kind of afraid of having stories that kind of reflect on real life, because they kind of want to go away from the cinema. But I think these are the movies that are the most important ones we were to go check out.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for joining me here and discussing this film with me.
Thank you for having me.
All That's Left of You is out this weekend, so please do check it out. Be sure to check out release weekend as well. As you mentioned before, that it's very important to watch it on release week so we can get more of these stories to come. So thank you so much. Thank you. I'm Junior from Outtake Show. Until next time.